So we're talking about AuDHD part two today. And what we did last time, and I'll mix a little bit in. If you weren't on the one last week, that's okay. What we talked about last time is just kind of the difference between the two, which I'll touch on in a new graph. So if you're on the one last time, it's not going to be too redundant. And then we're going to go a little bit more into autism and how to recognize that. And then the rest of the agenda is going to be really cool. It's going to be 10 things that people with AuDHD only experience. So people with ADHD aren't going to experience this. People with just autism aren't. So it's 10 things like adult AuDHD people experience. And then we're going to talk about autistic burnout because I think there's a lot of us, and I've seen this as a coach, I've experienced too, where we think it's like I need to get motivated, or maybe I'm depressed, or maybe I've got anxiety or whatever, and it's actually autistic burnout. It could be. And when you learn that, and then you can actually address it, and then you can get through it in a much different way. It's kind of like having the right diagnosis for something. If your knee hurts and you keep taking ibuprofen because you think it's inflammation, but your kneecap is in the wrong spot and you need a brace, you're not going to get better as fast. And so understanding the signs of autistic burnout, which as a real estate agent or an entrepreneur with autism, like you're in our field, especially right now in the market, you might have some burnout and you want to watch that. So that's going to be the agenda today. So the first thing I want to start out with is, what are some signs of autism in adults? Let's start there. And these are some key things. And this is just neat because we've got the ADHD piece and we talk a lot about that. And if you've got ADHD or autism, you're going to experience a little bit more of these things. So these are 15 things. I'll go kind of fast. Is rigid thinking and black and white logic. So struggling with nuance, change. You might have rules for things, how things work, like social rules, routines, expectations. And a lot of these, like if you have rules, one, you might have more rigid thinking. Also, you might have developed this as a way to, do well and thrive in certain circles. Because a lot of times we have good pattern recognition, and when you recognize patterns and then you realize, oh, here are the rules for this, because maybe we don't know it as well, and you make the rules in your head and you follow them, then you're not feeling like, what am I supposed to be doing? So there's some stuff that's just innate that you might be born with if you have autism and your brain formed that way, and some things you might have adapted to thrive and to do really well just organically without you even knowing. Executive function challenges. So we have that with ADHD. That's number two, executive function challenges. So we have that with ADHD. And then if you have autism as well, it puts another layer on it. So trouble with planning, organizing, switching tasks, forgetting steps, time blindness, estimating how long things take. It's kind of like you may already have it with ADHD, and now we're going to turn the volume up and with the autism part as well. Hyper focus on special interests. So deep passion and obsession with specific topics. I believe the word is like monolithic interest. I know I have that, which is why I do these calls, right? I love ADHD in real estate. You can talk about them for hours without realizing sometimes that the other person's not even interested. So if you're not interested, you guys are, so you don't see it. But I've learned in my work, in my personal life, in my family and stuff, to really watch for cues and facial expressions that I'm talking about ADHD too much, or certain narrow interests that I have, because it's, I think it's interesting, but they might not. And so that's something I had to learn in some of my behavioral therapy, is like how to recognize that. And then like interests may change abruptly, or they might last for years. You might have, and it could be some obscure interest, so that's number three. Number four is social communication. So we might struggle more with small talk, or social scripts, might skip like pleasantries and go straight into deep conversations. And we may not understand some of the implied social rules. So what you'll notice, I'm going through, these are with autism, right? Our world is not necessarily built for autism. And so the things I'm naming are not something wrong with us. It's, here are the things with how our brain works that the world has not adapted to us. So it's really like the things that might cause pain points or might be harder for us, but it doesn't mean something's wrong with us. It just means the world's built for the majority, and we may not be the majority. So these are the pain points, but it's not our fault. And I want to make that really clear, because how great to not go into pleasantries and actually get to the real stuff right away. Like, that's amazing, right? And we might not understand implied social rules because we might just be super direct and honest, and we're not trying to do something or Like, like we might just be really transparent and authentic. So these are more of like just things that may not match with the average population. Number five, flat or overly intense tone. So we could sound robotic, overly formal, overly enthusiastic, might be perceived as too much or too blunt. Sometimes we can speak too loud or we can speak too quiet for the situation. Number six, a difficulty reading nonverbal cues. So we might not recognize sarcasm, certain tone shifts, certain body language, facial expressions easily, might misread intent. So might not realize that someone might be bored or upset or they're joking. Um, that can happen. Number seven, social exhaustion or masking. So we might try to act normal in social settings, but it might feel exhausting. Like if I'm having a conversation with someone that's not authentic, that's more surface level, I'm going to need a nap after. Whereas somebody else might be able to do that or have it's like I can't. Let's be real. But if not, I'm going to have to do all the stuff in my brain to have that conversation. And then practicing like scripts responses ahead of time or replays conversations afterwards. Anybody that's done that, where you're gonna have a conversation and you're in your car and you're like repeating, you're like playing out the conversation or thinking what you're gonna say or saying out loud. I didn't know that wasn't normal until like a year and a half ago. So that's I'll have conversations all the time, and that's normal. It's normal because sometimes we're practicing how it's going to come across. So if you think of it, I know that we got corrected at some point if it was too blunt or whatever. So there's also that feeling sometimes of being misunderstood because people don't speak our language unless you're with someone else who has autism, and then it's like the most direct, wonderful conversation ever because there's no hidden intention, there's no subtleties. It's just here's what I mean, here's what I say, and you can trust it. And so, I mean, in some ways, the other people in the population are the ones that have it wrong. We just have to adapt because we're the minority. Um, this is interesting. So number 8, alsthymia. So this is tied to emotion regulation. This is trouble identifying or describing emotions. So we might feel really intense emotions, but we can't always name them or explain them. We could shut down or explode without warning. And it might be that we don't know what we feel about something until a week later. And so in relationships, that can be interesting. And I've had this too, because we can also be trusting. We talked about relationships before where, there'll be red flags, but I don't catch it because I might think, well, maybe I misread that or I can't trust myself. And then a week later, I'll say, wow, that was really messed up, but it's past the point of me catching it in the moment. And then, I might not have been able to stand up for myself. So that we can feel very big emotions, but have trouble articulating them or even naming them. We can have meltdowns or shutdowns under stress. So emotional overwhelm, crying, yelling, pacing. You might be stimming, trying to regulate, or shutdowns. Freeze. You can almost feel like nonverbal, like you don't want to talk or you can't. Retreating inward, disconnecting. And these are level 1, by the way. So with autism, level 1 is going to be like level 1 is what I have. And then level 3 would be more nonverbal, maybe can't even feed themselves. So you've kind of got the spectrum and they have those levels. So each one's going to need more accommodations and struggle more and more with how the world is set up. So level 1, we're not going to need someone to feed us. Or we might need to have something to help us like verbalize because we can't talk. But we're still experiencing all this stuff. And then rejection sensitivity and difficulty with criticism. So with ADHD, we already have rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and we might have it on a whole other level. So we can because we can feel really misunderstood. And so we might feel personally attacked by neutral feedback because we're expecting someone to criticize us. Or we might be deeply affected by perceived rejection or abandonment. And this is not necessarily biological with our brain. It might just be being in this world as a 30, 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old, 80-year-old whose experiences, and especially if you didn't have a diagnosis or people around you that understood. And so you may be used to being misunderstood. You may be used to people saying, oh, you're too blunt, you're too direct. You might be used to missing cues and then feeling like you're falling short. And so it's just kind of raw, right? It's like a wound and you put a little salt in that wound when, somebody's criticizing you because you're already like, dang, I've had enough of this, sensory processing. So we can overreact to not overreact, that's not a good word. We can have a strong reaction to textures, tags, noises, lights, smells, touch. Might have headphones, you might avoid crowds, you might gravitate towards comfort items. And because, in a lot of the stuff, there's a really good thing to the other side. Because we're so sensitive to sensory stuff, we also can experience it at this beautiful level. If you have this really soft blanket, we're going to feel that. And they say with autism, we take in 70% more stimulus. So we're going to feel 70% more softness in that blanket. Or if there's this, like, I don't know, chocolate chip cookies out of the oven, we're going to take in 70% more of that aroma. Or love or beauty or art or music. And that's why you have a lot of savants that have autism, because we can see things at a deeper level and notice intricacies and take it in more. And then we have pattern recognition, so we can create these just beautiful things. And so that's what I remind myself, because I have a lot of sensory stuff, is the flip side to that. And then we can also be sensory seeking, or we might stim. So we might, rock back and forth. That sometimes, and it's emotion regulation. So, and we're going to do a call this week or this month on masking and unmasking. And one of those things is allowing yourself to stim. And so when your body naturally wants to do something, like for me, when I was a kid, I didn't want to be like mentally handicapped, right? Like stimming, I didn't want to do it. So I suppressed it. And then I just had this anxiety. But when you allow yourself to stim and don't judge, like if you need to rock back and forth, or whatever that looks like, it can actually help you regulate your brain and calm all the overwhelm down. So sensory seeking could be tapping your toe, could be pacing around, it could be fidgeting, could be humming, it could be food. And we'll talk when we're going to do a call on stimming this month too. So stimming and then masking, we're going to have 2 different Tuesday calls on that. So I'll go more into that in detail. But there's all kinds of stimming, and that's going to be a really fun call. And then the last 3 on this is with our behavior and identity level. So 13, need for routine and predictability. So we can get really stressed when plans change suddenly. And then structure and ritual to feel safe. So a lot of us with autism will have what's called a regulatory routine, or a regulatory person that actually helps calm our nervous system. So there's some things in our day or routine or sameness. You go back to the same bed, or you go back to the same show you watch, or the same music over and over again. There's this sameness that actually calms our nervous system, and it's a good thing. It could also be a person. Sometimes you can have a regulatory routine that's actually a person, and then might be your partner or your roommate or even your dog, right? Like certain things that happen at a set time that someone else instigates, that we don't need executive function from, that we can kind of link onto, and it creates sameness in our day. Number 14, highly empathetic, but sometimes doesn't show it correctly. So deep emotional attunement, but we might not express it in expected ways. And we might seem cold or disconnected even when we care just intensely. And I don't know if you've experienced this. And there's this, some people have said, oh, with autism, like there's not empathy, or there's a disconnect or whatever. And there's a stigma out there sometimes. And that's not what's going on. It's just not expressed in the same way. So I might be feeling extremely deep empathy for someone, and I'm locked on intensely, but I'm not showing it in my face. And I might be feeling more empathy for them than they've ever felt in their life, because I'm picking up on 70% of their emotions and their energy. And I felt that before, and I'm picking up on patterns, and I'm taking all this in, and it's this beautiful thing, and they think I don't care. Or I might be overwhelmed, because it's just such overwhelming to take it all in, and I'm holding it. And so I'm just holding it so much. I'm not saying, oh, okay. It's like, so there's that thing. It's like, sometimes people think, oh, you don't care, in relationships, or they can, some, depending on if you show it or not. And it's the opposite. And so that's why it's so helpful to know, to get a diagnosis, to get a name for what you're experiencing, because then you can teach your loved ones, and they don't take it personal anymore. And they can ask you, like, what are you feeling right now? It's like, oh my gosh, I feel everything that you've just said, and I'm overwhelmed with, care for you. What can I do? Or you might show it a different way. And then number 15, sometimes we can feel different or outside or alien, and this like lifelong sense of not belonging. And we might mask to fit in, even if it feels fake or exhausting, because sometimes we just want, connection. And that can look like, and especially in women, chronic people pleasing and perfectionism, very high masking, very high masking, where you might get a diagnosis for autism and people around you are like, what? You don't have autism. Like that's a common thing for adults. Is people who don't have autism are like, you don't have autism. No, that doesn't make sense. And then if you have friends who have autism, like, yeah, we know. Oh, we thought you knew already. So there's this deep masking, and you might have been called too sensitive, right? Because we have these really sensitive nervous systems, which are beautiful. They're fine tuned. So we might have been seen as gifted or anxious or too sensitive. Those things, and so it's really interesting. I want to show you real quick with this. Um, and here's just a difference before we go into some of the other stuff. And we'll put these in the notes as well. But you're going to see this alien. So this was really interesting. Finding I had autism a month and a half ago was like the missing piece where I was like, oh, I'm not different. Because when you don't have the label, it's like, man, I still feel so disconnected. Why do I feel just like alien? And I used to say that as a kid. I was like, well, maybe I'm like alien or something. I knew I wasn't. Um, but these are just some ones. If you're driving, we're going to do this graph. I won't go through all of them. But again, ADHD, we're going to seek novelty and stimulation. Autism, we're going to seek predictability and sameness and safety. And then you can imagine if you got both, right? They're both kind of, you're going to figure out which one wins, which one, how do you compromise and get both needs met? Where if it's just predictability and sameness, you're going to get bored and restless and your ADHD is going to win. But if it's always novelty and change, it's going to be too much, and your autism is going to, and you might have this pendulum. So figuring out what that balance looks like for you is going to be really helpful. So yeah, ADHD struggles with routine, might resist it. Autism craves it, becomes distressed if it changes. And so and so sensory stuff, right? ADHD might seek stimulation, loud music, fidgeting, but doesn't get as overwhelmed by sensory input unless it's extreme. Whereas autism might be overwhelmed by like way too much, right? Even if it's not too much for someone with ADHD, it might be way too much for us. Um, let's see, and then like body language, and this can fluctuate depending on your presentation of ADHD. But with ADHD, it might be more expressive, more fidgety, more animated. And then with autism, might be more stiff or avoidant, or maybe some unusual gestures or facial expressions, or it might be dependent on the environment. Some environments, I'm just giving personal examples because I think it's helpful, and it might look different in you. When I'm in somewhere where I can talk about my special interest, right, where I'm at like a real estate conference, I get to see all of you or present, and I have some other special interests in my life as well. I'm going to be more expressive. I might be more animated. I'm just going to like turn on. I've heard people say that. It's like you something just you light up. And whereas if I go in an environment where like I'm not going to talk about any of that stuff, my narrow interests, and it might be kind of overwhelming. Like if I went to a game night, let's say, this was like 10 years ago. I remember with my current long-term girlfriend at the time, and we went to a game night, and it was all like neurotypical people who were super nice. And it was like this game called Spoons or something. And I like could not read how to fit in there, and I'm nice, right? So you just start to mirror people and kind of like just mask, you know, and they're so nice. They did nothing wrong. But it wasn't appropriate for me to talk about what my special interests were at the time. And it was hard. And so in that situation, I might be kind of stiff or come across as shy or avoidant, or I might not be as animated or energetic. But then when I get in an element where I can talk about stuff, I'm animated. And so again, it can fluctuate depending on the environment and where your sensory overwhelm is at. Because if you're overwhelmed sensory, you might be starting to shut down to preserve yourself. Whereas if you've just had a bunch of time alone, you might have all this energy. It might look different. So it can kind of, do that. And then self-concept. Sometimes, hey, I'm scattered, I'm disorganized. Sometimes, right, I'm all over the place. And then autism is I don't understand people, I don't belong, or I don't quite fit. So if you mix them together, think of that internal language. If that's how people see themselves, as hey, I'm kind of scattered, I'm all over the place, and I don't understand people, and I don't belong. And so if you've got ADHD, right, ADHD and autism, we're gonna do even more work on resetting how we talk to ourselves, because there's so many gifts. And once you can override these messages from the conditioning and replace them with what's true, which is you have a specialized brain that does really cool stuff. Because think about this, if you need sameness and routine and you also crave novelty and you can get really deep on certain interests and really passionate and go in depth and talk about it, there's so many good things that we can, deep empathy, like there's so many gifts in autism and ADHD especially. And so when you start to learn about it, you start to see the good stuff about it and the beauty and how it can help. It does really amazing things, really amazing things. And then, so with ADHD, I'll say friendship style, and I won't go through all these, but I'm going to go through this last one. So with ADHD, it might be having like a lot of acquaintances, right? And craving stimulus and being a bit more extroverted or wanting to go out and do that. And then with autism, prefers like fewer deep friendships, and they might be intense or withdrawn. But it might be a little bit more. Again, this isn't everybody. This isn't like a hard, fast rule. So you might see that networking is enjoyable in specific situations, but not others. Or you might not like big groups. You might want more one-on-one relationships, except sometimes, So it just kind of depends. But you can see how it's almost like opposites in a way, in some ways. But then when you have both, they're combined, and it's a really interesting balance. So those are some ways that they can show up different. And yeah, it's really interesting. So now I'm going to go through, I'm going to take a drink of water in my mason jar. I like moved in and didn't get new cups yet. And I had mason jars, and now I feel like eco-friendly. Okay, so here are 10 things that people who have ADHD, right, ADHD and autism specifically experience that someone who just has ADHD or just has autism wouldn't. So number one, a hyperactive brain and a rigid nervous system. So this is where we crave novelty, change, stimulation, fast ideas, movement, and then also predictability, sameness, and low sensory input. And so the result of that, and this is what we experience, we want change, but we also really want control of the change. And it's not because we're control freaks. Some people say that. It's because it can be so overwhelming to our nervous system. We're wanting control because we're trying to regulate and not like lose it. We're trying to not get so overstimulated or so dysregulated. And so we want control of the change because it has to be specific change in specific increments in a specific way, or it's going to overwhelm our system. And so if you've ever been told you're a control freak or all that stuff, throw that out. It's a coping mechanism for a different brain wiring, and it's actually self-care. It's actually self-care because you want to regulate how that change happens because you need change, but not too much. We might get bored easily, but transitions are extremely overwhelming. So you might not be okay with where you're at or the status quo, but then the change is way too hard and overwhelming. So you kind of stay in stuff a little bit longer than you want to. And then this is another one. And by the way, I'm going to go for probably Q&A will be the last 10 minutes. We'll see 15 or 10 minutes, just because there's so much good content I want to cover for this part too. So just FYI. So the last part of this hyperactive brain, rigid nervous system, and this is something, tell me if you experience this too. You seek adventure, but then you might have trouble with the hotel smelling weird or the difference in the bed, or it might be really overwhelming for things to change. So an example of that is travel. Like travel is so cool and so fun. And it might take me 2 days after I traveled to actually regulate and enjoy the trip because it's too much change. And it's gotten better. You can do different stuff to be able to do that. And bring certain stuff with you and bring some of your routines with you. There's a transition phase, and I can go over that at some point that I follow. But it used to be that I would book I would book 2 days onto a trip because I knew the first 2 days I'm going to be dysregulated. I'm not going to even be able to be that present because it's way too much for my nervous system with the change. And it's way better. Some of this stuff can just get better. And I want to throw that out there because that's a common thing. Because if you book a 3 or 4 day trip, And then you're on day 3 and it's like, oh my gosh, we got to start packing tomorrow. And I'm just now regulated enough to enjoy this. This sucks, you know? And so you don't want to beat yourself up. You want to expect that. And then when you come back from the trip, you're not going to just start back on Monday and go into it. You might have a week of integrating and then transition. That's why you want a transition plan into vacation or travel and out of vacation to soothe this instead of just expecting yourself to just go in and out seamlessly like someone who doesn't have this. That's not fair. Number 2 that AuDHD only experiences is emotionally intense but hard to express. So with ADHD, we can feel deeply, we can react fast because of impulse control. And then the autism side, we might struggle with interoception or just like feeling what it's like in our body, or allisthymia, right? Identifying emotions and then being able to translate those feelings into words. So the result of this is you might feel everything, but you don't even know how to explain what you're feeling, and you don't even know what you're feeling. So you might cry, you might freeze, you might shut down during conflict. And it's not because you don't care, it's because it's too much on your system. Like it literally has to shut down because it's too much. So it's really intense, but we may not be able to express it. Whereas if you just had ADHD, you might just be really angry, or you might say it out loud, or you might be able to articulate it. Or if you just had autism, you might handle it in a very different way, or it might just be a little bit more logical or practical than emotional. It's different. With autism, we can have big emotions too, but usually it's just a little bit harder to articulate. Number 3, social chameleon, but socially exhausted. So with ADHD, we can be outgoing, high energy, spontaneous, right? And then the autism side, mask to fit in, even more. ADHD, you mask to. We might overanalyze social cues. Oh my gosh, ChatGPT is like, oh my gosh, with me, it's like, okay, Tyler, go get a life. But we might overanalyze stuff, and I'll use ChatGPT all the time to ask stuff. Or you can actually do screenshots of texts or emails, and you can ask ChatGPT what they mean. And I've learned about all the stuff that I've been missing in certain interactions in conversations. And you can take audio messages and put the transcript in as well and give it background. And I'm learning a lot about things that I might be missing socially with that. And so if we overanalyze it, because it's like sometimes we don't see it in the same way and we miss stuff, and then people might get upset. And we might get very drained by small talk with autism and ADHD as well. So the result of this is we might be seen as charismatic in short bursts, but secretly burn out fast. So then people expect us to be social all the time, but then our nervous system needs like this deep, deep recovery to go back to equilibrium. And so an example of this, how this might show up is, you guys know I toured, speaking about ADHD, to like offices, right? And I loved it. It was so great. And I was very approachable. And then they wanted to do dinner that night. And I was spent. And I felt really bad. And sometimes I'd force it. And then I eventually, a lot of times, just said I wasn't able to, or it was right after the event. So there wasn't that transition from being on to relaxing to going back and being on to, so I've eased the transitions. And so again, this is where the awareness is. If that affects you, how do you ease the amount of transitions? And then what are your limits so you don't hit burnout, which will hit at the end. So charismatic in short bursts, but can burn out fast, and we need a lot of time to regulate. Number 4, sensory seeker and avoider. So with ADHD, we might be seeking stimulation, music, textures, movement. Autism side, even more extreme sensory sensitivities to touch, to light, to sound. And again, there's an overlap. Sometimes you can have sensory stuff with ADHD, but it's more extreme, and you're avoiding it more. So the result of that is you might love blasting music while working or working out, right? Super loud music can't get loud enough in your ears, but then you might get overwhelmed by like someone moving their chair on the floor, like quietly, or a scratchy shirt or background chatter. And so it may be hard to predict like what's comforting and what's overloading. And sometimes people don't understand, how can you blast this super loud music and then have trouble with the sound of my pen on the paper or the typing, next to you? It doesn't make sense. And so certain sounds can trigger us, or be soothing, and it's really interesting. So that comes back to that control thing. Or I don't know, has anybody been called selfish before as a kid? Has anybody been told that? I don't know. Okay, so we got a good amount of people. That was me. That was like one of my most embarrassing moments as a kid, in art class, because I wanted the music, a certain level and I wanted the lights off because it was so overstimulated. And I asked for it, and in front of the whole class, he said, Tyler, the world doesn't revolve around you. Like you're really like, called me selfish in front of the whole class in like sixth grade. And it was devastating. And I kept that with me for a long time and went the opposite. And what it was, I'm not selfish. I think you guys know that. And I've learned that finally now. I was trying to regulate my nervous system because I have to do it externally because my brain was so overwhelmed. So our brain's not regulating the same way because we take in more stimulus. And so, it's just an interesting thing. So if again, wanting control of the music and the lights is not because I'm controlling, it's because I'm like raw and my guts are out wide open, like all of us, because it affects us so much deeper, and we're just trying to get our needs met. So some of this too is like rewiring the conditioning we got as kids. If you were told some of this stuff and realizing, no, I have autism, you know what I mean? Like, screw you for not recognizing, making me feel bad about it. There's nothing wrong with me. So number 5, time blindness with ADHD, right? Time doesn't exist. We live in the now. It's either now or not now. And then time blindness, and then we need structure. So time doesn't exist. We want to just float around. And then autism, we need routine. We need predictability. We need clear time blocks. And so the result of that is you crave systems and rituals, but you might struggle to follow them a lot, right? Planning is soothing, but the execution is very elusive. And so it's calming to our nervous system to say, here's the structure. Okay, now I can rely on this because otherwise I'm just like floating around and it's too dysregulating. But then when it comes time to do it, it's like, oh, this is too rigid, you know? And so that's where even more so you're going to want to find the balance for you of how do you give yourself structure? Because we need it with AuDHD more than anybody. We need it, but it's got to be more flexible. And so it might be you do a few things a day, or you might do a couple things, but there's a little bit of room in there. And that's going to depend on your system. Or maybe you're really rigid for a month, and then your system's like, oh, now I need to float ADHD wins right now. And then you're more open. And then you're like, oh, my autism's winning. And then you go back to more rigidity. And then number 6, we talked about this a little bit, but rejection sensitivity and lateral thinking. So ADHD side, hyper aware of rejection or disapproval. That's a common thing. And then that's autism too. And then on the autism side, we take things more literally and we might miss nuance or sarcasm. And so the result of that is we might spiral emotionally from a simple text, overanalyze a tone even more, feel rejected when there was no rejection intended. We might take something literally with that. We might assume things are our fault even when they're not. We might assume someone's angry when they're not, someone doesn't like us. And we might have been rejected in the past because like making friends was harder at times, or we didn't read the subtlety of the room, or we actually just said what we meant and other people are like not used to that. And so we might be more sensitive to that stuff, but then we think literally as well. And another thing with this is why we might miss red flags. We could be exposed even more so to like emotional abuse because we think literally. We take things word, like how people say them, like word at at face value. So someone might say, hey, here's what I think about you, or here's what I believe, or here's what I'm going to do, but they don't do it. But we believe the words literally, and we don't watch the subtle cues, or we miss the nuance, and then we can get taken advantage of. That can happen as well because we say what we mean, and we're very particular with our words a lot of times, and so we just assume other people will be too, but they might be manipulating us and we don't even know. You know, it's like, oh, you do care, okay, I believe you. You know, but all the actions show they're not, or there's subtleties, or there's weird things. Or the friendships. You know, somebody might say, okay, well, come over anytime. You know, and they don't mean literally show up at their house. But as a kid, we might just show up because that's what they said. Come over anytime. We took it literally. And then we had to learn really quickly, no, you need to call. And it's like, well, that doesn't make sense. Why would you say come over anytime? Say call first, you know? So there's just all kinds of nuance. Number 7, so hyper focus. So with ADHD, we hyper focus on exciting or novel tasks. And then the autism side, we hyper focus on special interests or comforting routines. And it's a lot more narrow. And so the result of that is we might become obsessed with something overnight, or a person. So this is another thing, weaving into relationships. We can hyperfixate on a person as well. And then we might stay stuck in it for years. Or it's just all of a sudden we're just obsessed and we're curious. We want to know everything about that thing, that interest, that person, that hobby, that potential job, whatever. So the result is, yeah, and then switching away from it can feel physically painful, because remember, sameness feels really safe. And so we can stay in certain things, like there might be a video game or a show that you just, a comfort show you watch over and over again, or certain music or albums that you just have listened to for years and they're your comfort album. Or you might, it's kind of stimming too, you might have a song that you just over and over and over again you listen to, because it's soothing. So we can become obsessed with stuff, which is great. I mean, that can be a great thing as long as it's helpful. And then we don't want to leave it because it's comforting. So you don't have to, you know. And then number 8, always too much or not enough. This is something that people have reported. So we might be too sensitive but detached. We might be too loud or too quiet. We might be too emotional or too logical. Too messy but too rigid. And so there can be, autism can sometimes be a thing of extremes of what it looks like outwardly. And so we might have been told, you're too much, you're too loud, you're too quiet, you're not enough, you're not, like it's like people are trying to correct us because we're on the extreme end of something. And then it's just like this messy, disorganized narrative of like, oh my gosh, damned if I do, damned if I don't, or I'm too much, or I'm not good enough. So again, all these can be reversed. The first thing is identifying if you have that narrative and naming it, which takes the power out of it. Number 9, masked burnout and delayed shutdowns. So we might be able to hold it all together during the day using ADHD energy or for a conference or something, and then later experience a total autistic shutdown, burnout, fatigue, or dissociation. And so the result of that is nobody sees the crash, right? They think you're fine because you were productive or sociable earlier, but then you're mentally gone by the evening. So that might look like, if you have a spouse, it's like, how could you have all this energy and go do this whole thing, and now you can't do anything but lay on the couch? Why do you have only energy for this? And it might be our special interest, or it might be work or something. And it's not because we're just picking and choosing. Our nervous system either lights up or doesn't. It either produces dopamine or doesn't. You know, and then we can have, yeah, like at a conference, I could be on for days and then need to hide away for a week. Number 10, this is our last one on the AuDHD thing before we go into burnout. And this one's, I think a lot of us have experienced, and it's something I've had to learn, is deep empathy and poor emotional boundaries. Deep empathy, but poor emotional boundaries. So ADHD can bring passion, urgency, desire to help. And then autism, deep moral sensitivity. We can have like a justice sensitivity where if somebody lies or does something wrong, or there's something in the world politically, it's like it's beautiful, because it's like we're the ones that say, hey, wait, like Greta, with climate change. Greta, I'm spacing her last name, right? With I'm talking about Greta Thunberg. Thank you. Okay, so Greta Thunberg is like 13-year-old girl and brought like the whole world visibility to climate change. She's on the autism spectrum, and that was her monolithic interest, was climate change, right? And passion. And oh my gosh, did that change the world? And that's a little girl with autism that stood up to all the political giants, all the people with money, and like did that. And that's autism. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. So that's the social justice part. So with that, we have the moral sensitivity, we have the black and white loyalty, right? So when we're looking at the deep empathy, and then when I say poor emotional boundaries, sometimes we can overgive. If we've had to overgive our whole lives because we're tired and that doesn't work in our lives, we have to just keep going because we have to go to school, we have to go to work, and we constantly override what our limits are with our sensitive, gentle nervous system. Sometimes it's not like we fine tune that. Sometimes it's like you just stop listening to it, right? So you might overgive. And then the other thing, we take in all that stimulus and all the sensory stuff and all the extra data. So the result is we feel a lot of people's emotions, but sometimes we can't tell where they end and where we begin. Or we might take it on, or we have this deep empathy and we want to help, and and we're very like giving and trusting. And so we might actually get easily manipulated, drained, and just drained. It doesn't have to be manipulated, but people we care about. We might just overgive and not know where our limits are because we were not able to have limits, until you figure out what those are, and you at least say, hey, I'm at my limit. And this is where I'm at, by the way, and I say this too. And you guys know, I don't like to, I'm saying stuff about myself, to give you an example. because I think it's helpful. But I know where my limits are now. When I'll go into dysregulation, and there are sometimes I'll say, okay, I'm gonna go over my limit right now, and I know that I know what the consequences, and I know the plan to pull it back, and I'm okay with it. Versus just not knowing where the limit is and just giving freely, and then you're just dysregulated all the time. An example of that is, let's say I'm spending time with family and someone in my family really needs to vent and talk, and I've just spent the whole day socializing and I'm at my limit, like I'm about to go, but they're talking about something really important to them or really emotional that they haven't opened up on, and there's just no way I'm not gonna let them do that. So I'm gonna stay and I'm gonna hold the space, and I know I'm using the energy at the barrel bottom of the barrel, and I'm gonna feel really dysregulated and kind of like brain foggy and not great that night, and I'm going to cancel something else. But I'm going to play that cause and effect in my head before I go over my limit versus just being in burnout all the time and trying to clean it up. And so knowing where that is really important. Now, the other thing when we talk about deep empathy and poor emotional boundaries, I'm going to piggyback this onto as well as like oversharing or trauma dumping and not knowing when to stop. This can happen because we might miss social cues, right? And we miss the small talk. So you might find in some relationships that you bond like and you overshare too much too quickly. And then all of a sudden they kind of go away and you thought you're having this deep connection, but then they're gone now. And it's because you overshared and they were trying to be nice, but you didn't catch that it was too much. But we're just deep and we're very direct and we miss the small talk. And so you might find that in dating as well, or friendships or things like that. And then it's like, man, and it compounds on itself because it's like, man, I shared myself, I was super vulnerable and authentic, and then they went away. What's wrong with me? So that can happen as a kid. And then you think, oh, and really it might just be learning different tools and cognitive therapy to learn, well, what's appropriate for a first time you hang out with a friend, and what do you say and not say, or a first date, or in the work environment. And so we're going there are ways to learn this stuff. You can learn it online, you can put in ChatGPT, but learning what the steps are, because it's like other people have a guide already and we didn't have it. And so sometimes we have to go seek it. But yeah, so that's an interesting one that I've observed and experienced as well. Is that so those are 10 things that we can experience. How do we take it off? Yeah, yeah, right. We don't, because it's amazing. We work with it. We work good. Um, okay, so autistic burnout, and this is going to be the last segment before we go into the questions. And I would assume if you're in real estate, a lot of people have experienced this. You probably experienced something around that. Is so autistic burnout. It happens when you suppress your needs or traits to fit in for too long, right? You're just constantly masking and playing a character, and eventually it's just exhausting. It can also happen when you override your sensory and social overwhelm. So if I were to go work in the office every single day without headphones, with fluorescent lights, with the thin walls, I'm not going to do well. I'm going to have a meltdown. I won't even be able to work. If I do that too much without accommodations, without headphones on, without turning the main light off and having a little lamp, maybe coming a little earlier when it's quieter, or coming in the evening, right? I'm gonna do adaptations. Another thing that can cause autistic burnout is pushing through tasks or environments that aren't compatible with our neurology. So if you're in a constant state of stress in constant environments that are way too overstimulating, you're constantly pushing yourself and beating yourself up on tasks, and you're trying to do it in a way that's not sensory friendly or whatever, that can really take a toll. And then autistic burnout as well, long-term rejection, invalidation, emotional labor. So if you have people in your world that don't understand how you're wired, or give you a hard time, or just aren't great people, don't give you grace, don't give you support, or you're just rejected a lot, it doesn't feel good. It can cause burnout, because remember, emotion regulation takes mental space. It does, to regulate your emotions. If you're feeling rejected and then you have to regulate yourself, well, when do you have time to work, or to do what you need to do, or feed yourself, or do laundry? So creating an environment, and we're going to have a call this month on that as well. We're going to get themes now to the months. It's pretty neat. So we'll have a call on that. And so it can also be triggered by autistic burnout, can be triggered by big life changes, breakups, moves, job shifts, long-term masking or fawning. So fawning is like you kind of just it's like major people pleasing and kind of shrinking, essentially, like almost abandoning yourself is the way that I would say fawning, and then just doing whatever you need to in the environment. High demand with low support. So high output, but you don't have a lot of support. Trauma, gaslighting, being misunderstood, emotional abuse, these can all cause autistic burnout. So here are some key signs of autistic burnout. Cognitive brain fog, you can't focus, you can't plan, you're forgetting basic things, right? This is like you're not at your baseline. Words are harder to find, which is called aphasia, which is, we can experience that. Trouble making decisions way more than before. Decreased ability to mask or perform. So you just can't mask anymore. You just can't. You want to, but it's like that muscle's just so tired. It's like, I can't. And then people might think you're rude, or, you might come across as more standoffish or more reserved. Like you can't show up in the same way. Sensory, lower tolerance for noise, light, or touch. So noise might affect you even more. Light might feel brighter. Touch, you might not want to be touched, even more so. Things that were fine before now might cause meltdowns or shutdowns. So somebody might say, why is this? You had autism before. You were able to do that before. Why not now? Maybe you just aren't making a priority. Maybe you don't care. If you have someone that's non-supportive, and that's not true, you might just be getting into burnout. You might have desire to avoid stimulation completely. Completely. You don't want to go out at all. You don't want to be in social situations at all. You literally just want to be home and control all the stimulus. And it's not because you're a control freak. It's because your whole nervous system is like a little bit wounded almost, or just like tired or strained. And so you want to control the environment so it's predictable sensory stuff and it feels safe. Physical, you might have extreme fatigue. So yes, it can show up as somatic, extreme fatigue, body heaviness. You might get sick a lot, have way more upticks in pain, chronic pain. You might need to lie down or isolate for long periods at a time. So it really can show up somatically, because remember, it's our whole nervous system. It's not just up here for burned out. It can show up everywhere in all of those things. Emotional, might feel detached, numb, hopeless. You might have shame for not being able to function or do what you used to do. Loss of interest. This is a key one for me. I know I'm really in burnout when I have loss of interest in my special interests that I always like, right? Those things I like to do that I'm always passionate about. If I have apathy about certain things, like skateboarding is one of mine. I just watch videos all day. I skate almost every day. It's a special interest. ADHD, if I didn't have joy for these calls or excitement, they're like the best part of my week. And the Thursday one for sure too. That's a red flag for me. Emotion dysregulation or flatness. You might just have no empathy, like no emotion, like empathy, like yeah, just like your empathy you might be apathetic. And it's like, whoa, this isn't me. Or you might just be dysregulated all the time. And then social is the last piece of it. Dread of communication, even with loved ones. And this has happened to me, like your texts, you've got 30 unread texts and you just can't even go to them anymore. You can't listen to voicemails. They just drop off. You can't mask anymore. You're very irritable. You might very overwhelm even from like low effort interactions, and you might just have a desire to just withdraw completely. Withdraw completely. So let's see. And so how to reverse it. And then we'll do questions. So radical rest is cancel what you can, like just stay still, control the sensory input, maybe have a staycation if you can, or go outside in nature. But you want to let your body and your brain fully stop pushing. You want to stop trying executive. You want to give that executive function muscle a break. Because burnout is your system saying, I can't do this anymore. And you need to believe it, because you're going to get sick. You're going to get a chronic illness. You're going to have an uptick of mental health stuff. And at some point, you're going to have to just dissociate from yourself if you keep going. And it's going to be harder and harder to come back from. So if you could do, even if it's just a full day of just like an executive function break, where you're not doing chores, you're not doing laundry, you order food in if you can, maybe you talk to your partner, your spouse, or your family. It's just a day where you can just do nothing, whatever your body wants to do. If you stay in bed all day, do that. If you want to watch like Netflix marathon, do that. If you want to eat, whatever, just give that discipline muscle a break. Number 2, unmasking, which we'll go deeper into this month when we do the calls. But be weird, be real, like stim, let your sensory needs like get what they need, figure out, check in what those are. Drop the performative behaviors. Like if forced eye contact is really hard for you, give yourself a break. Don't do that. Stop the people pleasing, right? So masking can equal exhaustion. Unmasking is like oxygen. You're going to feel so much better to unmask and just give that a break. Number three, minimize your sensory load. So use noise canceling headphones, dim the lights, wear soft clothes, avoid overstimulating environments. If you've got to go out and do stuff with friends, maybe you go outside and go for a hike instead of some loud thing, or going to the mall, or going out to eat in a restaurant on a Friday night. Like, figure out your limits and ask for accommodations and teach people how to help you. Number four, withdraw from social pressure. So give yourself permission to not text back or answer calls or explain. It's okay if it takes 24 hours. Let people that you trust know you're in burnout and you need space. Explain it to them instead of just disappearing so they don't take it personally. If they don't understand, you've explained it really well, you've articulated it, then that's not about you, that's about them. And, that's not your fault. You might get some repetitive low effort comfort activities like watching the same show every day before bed. Watch one episode of a comfort show before bed, so you can lean on that. It's not a discipline activity. It gives you energy. So do that. Puzzles, stimming, crosswords, like something before bed that's kind of fun or calm. Eat familiar foods or safe foods. Use a weighted blanket. Ground your body. Take a hot bath before bed. Like something that's just soothing. Drink tea. Something nice. And then just a few more of those. Reclaim your special interests. So this is big for us with autism because special interests actually give us energy. So we need to make time for our special interests. So allow yourself to do that, whatever that is. If you like murder documentaries, watch them. You know what I mean? If you like to dance, make sure you're dancing. It's not, oh, it's this fun extra. No, this is like our livelihood, is our allowing time for our special interests and embracing them. It's not indulgent. It's not like somebody else kind of indulging. It's like, it's part of our nervous system and we need it. We need it. Number seven, cut non-essentials. Let stuff drop sometimes. It's okay. It's okay to maintain a business. You don't have to grow every single week, every single month. You don't have to be productive and impressive. Just maintain what you need, and then prioritize what's life sustaining for right now. What do you have to do, not want to do? What do you have to do right now just to sustain, and give yourself a time period? So it's like, okay, I'm going to do this for a month, or I'm going to do this for a week. And then after that, then I'll pick up and be productive. But I'm going to give myself a break instead of kind of, but not setting a time period and beating myself up. And then number 8, last one, get validation. You're not lazy. You're not broken. You're not dramatic. You have a sensitive nervous system that is wired a different way. And the world is not built for you. It's built for a non-autistic, non-ADHD system. And so that's why they don't experience it. Not because you're weak or worse or too sensitive. The world is built for them. That's why they don't experience it, because it's literally built for their nervous system. And if it was built for our nervous system, they would be having to take a break. They would be getting burnout, but we're the minority, so it didn't. And so understand that. You're not dramatic, right? And find other people who get it, talk to them, even if it's online communities and our communities, do that and get validation. So it can take, you can reverse this in, depending on how early you catch it, in days, in weeks, in months. It's just how long do you let it go on? But the more you resist, sometimes the longer it can last. And burnout can become chronic if you try to just override it. And you may, I mean, some people can be in like half burnout for years and years and years and not even know it and think, man, why can't I get motivated? It's like, well, you've been in burnout for 5 years and you haven't given yourself a break, you know? So yeah. So next week our call is on masking. So we're going to go deeper into masking. And then the next call is on stimming. So we'll go into that as well, because we're going to unmask and we'll talk all about masking and the grief period and the cycles and like what that can look like. And then we'll talk about stimming that next week. And I believe the next one is creating a sensory friendly environment. So to what Dan just said about the emotion regulation, sometimes there's external stuff that we can adjust that will create less emotion regulation stuff. So if you're in an environment and we can make it more sensory friendly, it's not going to be overwhelming to the system. So it's going to be able to take more. And so you might not get as panicky, or you might not get as anxiety, or your nervous system might be more calm. And then the other thing, this is really cool. So when you unmask, your friends might shift. Some will stay the same. Some might shift, and it's okay. And then you'll get friends that speak your language or are okay with you unmasking. And then all of a sudden your energy starts coming back because you don't have to mask anymore. It's kind of scary at first to see who stays. and then you see that people stay, and it's like this authentic, really cool thing. So it's just, I don't know, it's really freeing. And then this Thursday, if you're in ADHD agents, we have our business planning clinic, which is ADHD, autism friendly, learning disability friendly, and it's our mid year review. So you're going to be able to plug in all your numbers. And Brittany, if you could type it in the chat how to sign up. And so we're going to have like an economic model. We're going to have a business plan. So you're going to be able to see this is the coaching. So these Tuesday calls are educational. The Thursday calls are going to be business building, specifically for ADHD and autism brains. So ADHDagents.com, you can sign up for that. So this Thursday is our business planning clinic / mid-year review, where you're going to figure out exactly what you need to do to hit goal by the end of the year, how much money you need, how many sales, how many listing appointments, and then your plan of lead generation that feels good for your brain. So ADHDagents.com if you want to do that. And that is for members on there. So yeah, it's going to be a great week. Great week. So yeah, we'll see you next week, unless you're with our group coaching, ADHD Agents, which is $97 a month only, and then we donate some of that to nonprofits. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, we'll see you next week, unless you're doing our group coaching on Thursday. So thanks for being there, and remind yourself how special your brain is. All right, take care, everybody.